Claude responded, "My grandson stopped breathing for 11 seconds when my daughter-in-law's family showed up at our lake house with 15 suitcases and 2 inflatable kayaks." My grandson stopped breathing for 11 seconds when my daughter-in-law's family showed up at our lake house with 15 suitcases and 2 inflatable kayaks, expecting a welcome party. I was 63 years old, standing in a hospital corridor in Traverse City, Michigan, and I wrote back 4 words to the family group chat: "The house is closed." It was just past midnight on a Tuesday when the nurse pulled the curtain around little Wesley's bed and told us his oxygen had dipped low enough that they wanted him on a monitor overnight. He was 4 years old, my only grandson, and he'd been fighting a nasty case of RSV for 6 days that had finally turned into something the pediatrician called concerning enough to keep an eye on. My son Peter sat in the chair beside the bed with his head in his hands. His wife Dana stood at the window with her arms crossed so tight I thought she might crack a rib. I'd driven up from my place in Cadillac the second Peter called, because that's what you do, you show up, and I was still wearing the flannel shirt I'd had on when I was fixing the fence line that afternoon. My back had been aching for 2 days from hauling posts, but none of that mattered once I saw Wesley's little chest working that hard just to pull in air. That's when my phone buzzed on the vinyl chair beside me. The family group chat, the one my late wife had started years ago called Cottage Crew, usually full of nothing but fish pictures and complaints about the dock needing new boards. This time it was Dana's mother, Carol, writing from 3 states away in Ohio. "Harold and I are bringing the whole gang up Thursday. 16 of us this time. The Kowalski cousins are coming too. Tell Frank to get the boat ready." I read it twice, standing there under the fluorescent lights with my grandson's monitor beeping steady behind me. She hadn't asked whether the cottage was even open for the season yet. She hadn't asked about Wesley, even though Dana had posted in that same thread 4 hours earlier that they were headed to the emergency room. Dana read it over my shoulder and went rigid the way people do right before they either scream or go completely silent. She chose silent. She took the phone from my hand and typed back herself, careful and polite the way she always was with her own mother. "Wesley's in the hospital with RSV. Can we push this to next month?" The answer came back inside of 2 minutes, and it wasn't from Carol. It was from Dana's father, Harold. "Everyone already took the week off work. We're not rescheduling 16 people over a cold. My son is a good man, but a quiet one, and he has never once in the 14 years I've known Harold heard that man back down from anything." Carol added her own line right underneath his, "We'll bring our own food. We won't be any trouble at all." Never mind that 16 people, 3 dogs, and a rented pontoon boat is a fair amount of trouble no matter how many casseroles you bring with you. I want to explain something about that cottage before I go any further, because it matters for everything that comes after. That cottage on Higgins Lake had belonged to my late wife Ruth's family since 1974. When her parents passed, they left it to her outright. And when Ruth passed 8 years ago, it came to me. And eventually it'll go to Peter and, God willing, to Wesley after him. I have put more of my own retirement into that roof, that dock, that septic system than I care to add up. Dana's family had been coming up every summer for the better part of a decade, ever since Peter and Dana got married, and somewhere along the way it had quietly turned into their cottage, in everyone's mind but mine. Carol kept a set of her own towels in the hall closet. Harold called the lakefront bedroom his room, like he'd built it with his own 2 hands instead of sitting on the porch drinking my beer while I re-shingled it 3 summers back. Dana's brother Kyle had brought a girlfriend up there for a whole month one summer without asking anybody, and when I finally said something gentle about it, Carol told me I was being difficult about family. I stood in that hospital hallway running the math on every summer that had come before this one, the way you do when you've finally had enough and your brain starts building the case for you whether you want it to or not. The year they showed up 2 days ahead of schedule, and I had to scramble to get the water turned back on. The year Harold parked his camper across my entire driveway for a week without asking. The year Carol left a grocery list taped to my own refrigerator like I was hired help. Dana didn't push me one direction or the other. She just looked at Wesley, small and pale against that hospital pillow, with a tube taped under his nose, and she said the only thing that mattered: "I am not leaving this boy's side for anybody's lake vacation." I understood exactly what would happen if I let this slide the way I always had. I would drive the 4 hours up to the cottage myself, open the place, stock the fridge, smooth over Harold's complaints about the water pressure, and play host to 16 people, while my own grandson lay in a hospital bed 200 miles away. That was the arrangement nobody had ever agreed to out loud. The one everybody in that family had just come to expect from me because I never once said no. I typed 4 words back into that group chat. The house is closed. Peter looked over at me from his chair, his eyes red from exhaustion. Dad, are you sure? I told him I was sure. I set the phone face down on the little rolling table by Wesley's bed, and I picked up my other phone, the one I still keep for business even in retirement, and called Gary, a fellow I've known since high school who does security work up around Higgins Lake now. I left him a voicemail asking if he could meet me at the cottage first thing in the morning to swap out the door locks and check on the alarm keypad I'd had installed 2 summers back and never bothered to use. The guilt showed up almost immediately, the way it always does with me. Carol and Harold were in their late 60s. The whole extended family had planned this trip for a month. Somebody, somewhere, was going to call me a monster before the weekend was even over. Then Wesley stirred in that hospital bed, his small hand finding my finger the way it always did since he was a baby. And even half asleep and struggling for breath, he managed 3 words. Grandpa, stay here. That settled it. 20 years of me being the family's yes man came apart in 3 words from a 4-year-old boy hooked up to an oxygen monitor. I drove up to Higgins Lake before sunrise the next morning while Peter stayed behind with Wesley and Dana. The drive from the hospital took a little over 3 hours, and I spent most of it turning things over in my head, the kind of thinking that sneaks up on a man once he finally stops running from it. My phone kept buzzing along the dashboard mount, but it wasn't anybody asking after Wesley. Make sure there's ice in both freezers. Harold wants the boat gassed up. Check if the hot tub's working, his knees have been bad. Not one message asked how my grandson was doing. Not a single one. Somewhere past Grayling, doing 70 on a 2-lane highway with pine trees running along both sides, I caught myself asking a question I didn't much care for the answer to. Was I protecting my grandson? Or had I finally found an excuse to do something I should have done a decade ago? I decided it was probably both, and that felt more honest than pretending this was purely about Wesley. Gary met me at the cottage around 9 that morning, and I could tell my request threw him a little because he'd known this family for years too, had watched 3 generations of us tromp in and out of that place every August. New code on the front door, I told him. Wipe every old code from the system completely. Separate lock on the boathouse. And I want that alarm actually armed this time, not just sitting there for show. He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue with me. Trouble with the family, Frank. Boundary with the family, I said. It wasn't a clever line, it was just the truth. While he worked, I went through the cottage myself, cleared the perishables out of the fridge, packed up Wesley's little bucket and shovel from the sun porch, along with the stuffed raccoon he'd left behind after Labor Day, pulled the porch furniture into the shed because a front was moving in off the lake, closed the blinds, turned the water heater down low. I didn't shut off the water main or the electric. I wasn't out to hurt anybody. I just wasn't going to open that door for people who couldn't be bothered to ask how a sick child was doing. Before I left, I taped a single sheet of paper to the inside of the front window, facing the driveway. Cottage closed for the week. Family emergency. My phone rang while I was locking the boathouse. Harold. I nearly let it ride to voicemail, then answered anyway. He didn't ask about Wesley either. Did you get the dock cleaned off? He said, like nothing at all was wrong. I told him the cottage wouldn't be open this week. There was a pause long enough that I could hear his television going in the background. You don't get to do this to Carol, he said. I felt that old reflex kick up in my chest, the one that wanted to apologize before he'd even finished his sentence. Then I looked over at the little life jacket still hanging on a hook by the door, the one with Wesley's name written on the tag in Sharpie. This isn't about Carol's feelings, I told him. My grandson can't breathe right on his own. Kids get sick, Harold said. Family adjusts around it. That's exactly what I'm doing, I told him, and I hung up before he could get another word in. My hand was shaking a little after, which caught me off guard. 63 years old, and a phone call from my son's father-in-law could still rattle me like that. On the drive back down to Traverse City, Carol sent the group chat a full sleeping arrangement for all 16 guests, as though nothing I'd said had registered at all. Her sister and brother-in-law got the 2 upstairs bedrooms. Kyle, of course, got the lakefront room, the one Harold liked to call his own. I read it sitting in a gas station parking lot off 131, and instead of the guilt I expected, I felt something closer to clean, cold clarity. I opened the app for the door lock on my phone and deleted every guest code one at a time until the screen showed nothing but my own name on the list. A little notification popped up, all access removed, and for the first time since that message had landed in the group chat the night before, the silence coming off that empty cottage didn't feel like something I owed anybody an apology for. By Thursday afternoon, I was back at the hospital with Peter and Dana. Wesley's oxygen numbers had crept up a little overnight, and he'd managed to eat half a popsicle, which felt like the best news any of us had gotten in days. Dana sat on the edge of his bed, reading him a picture book while I stood by the window trying to keep my hands busy, folding the same blanket over and over so my mind would quit circling back to Higgins Lake. At 2:40 that afternoon, my phone lit up with a motion alert from the doorbell camera I'd forgotten I'd even set up. I opened it without thinking twice, and there they all were. 3 vehicles pulling up the gravel drive. Harold's pickup with the camper hitch behind it, Carol riding shotgun. Behind that, Kyle's SUV. And behind that, a rented minivan packed with cousins I mostly only saw at Thanksgiving. 16 people climbed out over the next several minutes. Coolers, duffel bags, 2 kayaks strapped to a roof rack, a dog pulling hard on its leash toward the water. I watched the whole thing unfold in silence on a 6-inch screen while I stood in a hospital room 200 miles away. At first, they thought the keypad had simply malfunctioned. I could see Harold punching in the old code again and again, shaking his head, trying the door handle like it might change its mind. Carol had her phone out already. Kyle was walking the side of the house looking for a door that had never once existed on that side. The calls started almost right away. I let the first 2 roll to voicemail. Carol's voice came through confused, more than angry. "Frank, the door isn't working. Call me back." Then Kyle, sharper. "Real funny, Frank. Send the new code." Then Harold. And this was the one that actually got under my skin a little. "Your grandson's fine. We checked, quit playing games, and opened this door." I sat there holding that phone, feeling the old pull to just make it all stop, to send the code through and smooth it over one more time the way I always had. They were in their 60s and 70s. There were kids among that group who hadn't done a single thing wrong. I didn't want anybody actually stranded with nowhere to go. So I typed one message to the whole chat and nothing more. "The cottage is closed. There's a Holiday Inn Express and a Baymont in Roscommon. Both have vacancy. I checked this morning." I'd named the 2 hotels on purpose because whatever else this was, I wasn't out to leave my own family sleeping in a parking lot with no plan at all. That's when Ed walked over. Ed's my neighbor 2 lots down, a retired postal worker who's lived on that lake longer than Ruth's parents ever owned our place. He doesn't get tangled up in family business as a rule, keeps mostly to himself and his pontoon boat. But with 16 people and 3 vehicles blocking half the shared drive, I suppose he figured somebody ought to say something. Kyle asked him if he had a spare key sitting around. "I don't," Ed told him. "Frank changed every lock yesterday morning, had a fellow out here doing it himself." Carol told Ed this was the family cottage, had been for years. Ed just shrugged, calm as could be. "Belongs to Frank now, always has since Ruth passed. Her people owned it before that." I heard about this part secondhand later, but apparently that one plain sentence landed on that whole group harder than anything I'd said on the phone. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact nobody in that family much cared to say out loud. Ed added one more thing before he wandered back toward his own dock. Frank said his grandson was in the hospital, figured everybody already knew that part. Nobody standing in that driveway wanted to admit they'd known and driven up anyway. Somewhere in the middle of all that confusion, one of the dogs got loose from its leash and knocked over a cooler, sent a bag of ice sliding down the gravel toward the mailbox. A package of hot dogs split open on the ground. And in the middle of all that mess, one of the younger cousins asked, loud enough that the doorbell microphone caught every word of it clearly, "Uncle Kyle, I thought you said this was our cottage." Kyle didn't have an answer for that one either. Back at the hospital, Peter asked if I wanted to call anybody back yet. "Part of me does," I admitted. Dana didn't push me one way or the other. She just reminded me, gentle as anything, that Wesley had finally drifted off for the first real stretch of sleep he'd had in 3 days. A few minutes later, Harold called again, and the ringtone startled Wesley awake. He started crying, this thin, worn-out little cry that did something to my chest a lot faster than any angry voicemail from Harold ever could. I put the phone on silent and didn't look at it again that night. That evening, Kyle posted something on Facebook. My father-in-law locked out his own family, 16 people, including small children, after we drove 3 hours to see him. Some folks forget where they came from. No mention of Wesley's oxygen levels. No mention that Dana had asked them to wait. No mention that the cottage had been mine and Ruth's for 50 years before any of them ever set foot on that lake. No mention that I'd told Harold the day before, or that I'd texted the whole chat 2 hotel names the second they pulled into that driveway. Within the hour, relatives I hadn't heard a word from in over a year were messaging me directly. Carol's sister called and asked, in that voice people use when they already think they know the answer, couldn't you have handled that a little differently, Frank? I sat with that question longer than I wanted to admit. That night, Wesley woke up coughing hard enough that I had to sit him up against my chest just to help him get a full breath in. My phone kept lighting up on the nightstand with messages I never opened. Wesley pressed his face into my shirt and murmured the only thing that mattered in that whole room. No loud people, Grandpa. I turned that phone off completely. The locks, I understood then, had been the easy part of all this. Friday morning, Wesley's numbers still hadn't climbed the way the doctor had hoped, so they kept him another day for observation. I sat in a plastic chair in the family lounge scrolling through my phone and found Kyle's post had already made its way into the wider family chat, the one with aunts and second cousins I mostly only see at funerals and the occasional wedding. Somebody had commented calling me heartless. Somebody else used the word selfish. I sat there seriously considering just reopening the cottage the following week to make all that noise stop. Dana came and sat down beside me, must have read something in my face, because instead of arguing with me, she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder I'd never once seen before. Inside were bank statements, copies of checks, screenshots of old texts asking for help, records she'd apparently been keeping for years for our own taxes, tracking every dollar that had ever left our family's account and gone toward hers. You keep remembering what they needed, she said, opening it across her knees. I kept remembering what it cost us. We went through that folder together right there in that lounge waiting for Wesley's next set of vitals. The total came out to just over $194,000 across 16 years, not counting the hundreds of unpaid hours I'd spent up on that roof or under that dock with a toolbox in my hand. 3 memories stood out clearest as we went line by line. Back in 2014, Kyle came up $11,000 short trying to keep his own house after a business fell through. Harold told me at the time, plain as anything, "You're doing fine, Frank. Your son-in-law's got a family to feed." I pulled that money straight out of what Ruth and I had been saving to finally redo our own kitchen. Kyle promised he'd pay it back inside of a year. He never did. Bought himself a new truck about 4 months later. Then in 2019, Peter and Dana had finally planned a real vacation of their own, their first one since Wesley was born. 3 days before they were set to leave, Carol's roof started leaking bad. Harold didn't want to pay a contractor. "Frank knows how to do it," he said. I canceled a trip of my own. I'd had planned that same week and spent 5 days up on that roof, paid for every shingle out of my own pocket. And then there was the cottage itself, slowly turning into something that wasn't really mine and Ruth's anymore, even though our name was the only one that had ever been on that deed. Sitting there doing that arithmetic, I understood the money wasn't really the part that stung the worst. What stung was understanding I'd spent years buying peace with Dana's family, using my own retirement, my own time, and money that should have gone toward my son's small family instead. I always told myself I was the one holding everybody together. I said that out loud to Dana, sitting right there in that lounge. I kept telling myself I was helping. She didn't look away from me. "You were helping them," she said. "You just forgot Peter and Wesley were part of the family too." She didn't say it to wound me. It was just true. And it landed the way true things always do, quiet and heavy at the same time. When the doctor finally cleared Wesley to go home Saturday morning with a new inhaler and a follow-up appointment, I carried him out to Peter's car myself. He was too worn out to even fuss when Peter buckled him into his car seat, his little head tipping to one side, breath still coming a shade too fast for my liking. I thought about 16 people trying to walk into that cottage with dogs barking and coolers banging against the porch rail and cousins running down the hallway while a 4-year-old boy struggled just to breathe, 200 miles away, and whatever doubt I still had about those locks disappeared right then. That evening, once Wesley was settled at home, I sent one more message to that family chat. "We're having one sit-down 3 weeks from this Saturday at my place. I'll say my piece once. After that, the new rules stand." Harold wrote back almost before I'd set the phone down. "Good. You owe everybody an apology, especially your grandson's grandmother." I looked over at that manila folder still sitting open on my kitchen table. He still thought I was calling everybody together to surrender. 3 weeks later, Wesley was nearly back to his old self, chasing the neighbor's cat along our fence line and asking for a snack every 20 minutes like a boy who'd never spent a single night in a hospital bed. Watching him tear around that backyard made everything ahead of me a good deal easier to face. The meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon at my house in Cadillac. I kept the food simple, burgers off the grill, a couple bags of chips, a pitcher of lemonade sweating on the porch rail. Nobody showed up expecting a cookout. They showed up expecting an apology and a reopened cottage. Kyle still hadn't taken his Facebook post down. Harold sat himself at the head of my picnic table first, arms crossed, and got right into it. Before anybody eats, Carol deserves to hear what you've got to say for yourself. I didn't argue with him. I walked around that table and set a small stack of papers down beside each of them. The first page had one line printed across the top. What we gave, what it cost us, and what changes starting today. I told them plainly I wasn't asking a single one of them to pay any of it back. I just wanted the numbers said out loud, once, with figures attached to them. $11,000 for Kyle's mortgage, $6,200 in emergency dental work for Carol over the years, $19,000 in materials for repairs on Harold and Carol's own house, close to $40,000 in groceries, propane, dock repairs, and cleaning tied up in that cottage alone. On top of all that, smaller loans that never once came back around, $194,000 total across 16 years. Kyle said I was treating family like it was some kind of business deal. No, I told him. A business would have sent invoices. I never sent a single one. He pushed back harder, said the whole family had used that cottage for years, that locking everybody out over it was cold. That's when Dana spoke up for the first time that afternoon. Using something for years doesn't make it yours, Kyle. She laid a printed text message down flat in front of him, one he'd sent the summer before. Tell Frank to clear his old fishing gear out of the lakefront closet before we get there. Why exactly was I supposed to clear my own father-in-law's things out of a house his late wife's family built? She asked him. He didn't have an answer, sitting ready for that one. I told Kyle I wanted that Facebook post taken down, or corrected at the very least. He said it reflected how he'd honestly felt in the moment. Then leave it up, I told him, but I'm posting our group chat right underneath it. Kyle went quiet fast. He knew exactly what sat in that thread. Dana's message about Wesley's oxygen, Harold's reply that nothing was changing regardless. One of Carol's own sisters, sitting a few chairs down, looked right at him and said, "You left all that out, Kyle." He muttered something about Facebook not being the place for every single detail. Funny, she said. It was apparently the place for every detail that made Frank look bad. Harold tried a different angle after that. After everything this family's done for you over the years, this is how you pay us back. I didn't deny they'd been family to me, that Ruth had loved every one of them in her own way. I'm grateful for the years we've had together, I told him, but that doesn't hand you a lifetime claim on my late wife's cottage, or my savings, or my time. Carol's voice cracked a little then. We only ever wanted to keep everybody together, Frank. Dana answered that one for me, calm as still water. You brought 16 people to a cottage while a 4-year-old was fighting for a full breath in a hospital bed. That wasn't keeping anybody together. That told us plainly we didn't matter enough to wait a month. Carol started to cry, and something in me nearly folded right there. Wanted to take it all back, pour her a glass of lemonade, let the whole afternoon dissolve the way these arguments in my family always used to. But then I thought of Wesley flinching at a ringing phone, whispering, "No loud people, Grandpa," and I stayed put in my chair. I laid out the new terms plain and simple. Nobody sets foot at that cottage without Peter, Dana, or myself inviting them first. No more self-scheduled trips onto property that isn't theirs to schedule. No more informal loans handed out with no paper trail behind them. I'd still show up for a genuine emergency, but I was done covering Kyle's lifestyle choices for good, and anybody who used my grandson's health as leverage again would lose their standing invitation entirely. Harold asked me straight out if I was choosing Peter's side of things over Dana's own family. I looked through my kitchen window at Peter and Dana stacking blocks with Wesley on the living room floor. No, I told him. I'm choosing the family that's actually mine to look after. Then I asked one last question of the table. Can any one of you name a single time you asked me before bringing people up to that cottage? Nobody answered. Not Harold, not Carol, not even Kyle. The silence said everything I'd spent 3 weeks trying to find the right words for. That's why the locks changed, I told them. Kyle deleted that post right there at the table, not because his mind had changed about any of it, but because he didn't much care to have that group chat screenshot sitting underneath it for everyone to see. Before he left that afternoon, Harold told me I'd torn this family apart with my own 2 hands. No, I told him. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken long before this. Kyle didn't speak a word to me for almost 4 months after that Saturday. That part still stings more than I let on to anybody. He'd leaned on me plenty over the years, sure, but he was still my son's brother-in-law, still part of Wesley's own family. There were nights that fall I lay awake wondering if I could have drawn that same line without drawing quite so much blood along with it. What I noticed instead, as the weeks passed, was how much lighter the rest of my life started to feel once the bleeding finally stopped. Money that used to vanish into somebody else's emergency started staying put in my own account for once. Peter, Dana, and Wesley came up and stayed a full week with me that fall. Just the three of them and me, no roof waiting to be patched, no grocery list taped to a refrigerator that had never once been theirs to stock. My knees still ache most evenings, and my lower back still has plenty of opinions about hauling fence posts. But at least I'm not spending my weekends fixing things for free anymore. Not for people who never once thought to ask how my grandson was doing. My relationship with Harold and Carol never healed up clean, and I've stopped waiting around for it to. Harold never once apologized. Not directly. Not to this day. Carol sends careful little texts around the holidays, the kind that read more like obligation than warmth. I didn't cut either of them off completely. I still call to check in, still ask after Harold's knees. But I stopped being the automatic answer to every single thing that goes sideways in their lives. When Harold's furnace quit on him that winter, I gave him the number of a good repairman instead of driving 4 hours with my own toolbox. He wasn't thrilled about it. He handled it anyway, same as he always could have. About 5 months after that Saturday in my backyard, my phone rang, and it was Carol. I braced myself the way I always used to before picking up her calls. She didn't say, "We're coming up Saturday." She didn't announce a single thing. "Would it be all right?" she asked, hesitating in a way I genuinely never once heard from her before. If Harold and I came by for a Sunday visit, just the two of us. It wasn't an apology, and I want to be honest about that much. It wasn't some tidy ending where everything gets resolved in one phone call. But it was the first time in longer than I could remember that she'd actually asked me anything at all. I looked over at Dana, who was folding Wesley's little shirts on my couch, and she gave me a small nod. "Sunday from 2 to 5 works fine," I told Carol. "Wesley naps before that most days." "We'll come by after his nap then," she said. Small, almost nothing at all if you didn't know the whole history behind it. But it was real. The following summer, the three of us drove back up to that cottage on Higgins Lake for the first time since that Thursday the year before. Wesley was 5 now, steady on his feet, and he ran straight down toward the water with a little green net like he owned the whole shoreline, which in a way, now, he finally did. Dana sat out on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching him chase minnows in the shallows. I walked up to that front door before we went inside and checked the lock, out of habit more than anything else by then. It didn't feel like a weapon in my hand anymore. It was just a lock, the same as every house on that lake has hanging on its door. The plain, ordinary right to decide for myself who gets to walk through my own front door. I've thought plenty about what the real payoff in all of this turned out to be. It wasn't the number in that manila folder. It wasn't the picture of 16 people standing confused in a gravel driveway. It was something a good deal quieter than either of those things. It was making sure my grandson grows up understanding that love was never supposed to mean letting people walk right past what you need. Dana came and stood beside me while Wesley kept chasing minnows through the shallows. "Any regrets, Frank?" she asked. I watched that boy laughing at nothing in particular, soaked to the knees already. "I regret waiting as long as I did," I told her. "If you've ever had to draw a line with your own family, you already know it never comes easy, and it hardly ever comes clean. But sometimes the people who love you most are standing right there in front of you the whole time, just waiting on you to finally notice them. Take care of the ones who actually respect your home and your heart, because not everybody who calls you family will." Claude responded, "Love was never the problem in that family. The silence was. All those years of saying yes when everyone meant no. Love was never the problem in that family. The silence was all those years of saying yes when everyone meant no. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for the people you love is close a door so they finally learn to knock. A locked house healed more than an open one ever could, because it gave everyone room to tell the truth at last.